And Andrew Ivins joining us now. He's our director of scouting, but today he's also the principal because he's handing out some report cards for these classes. So Andrew, let's start with LSU, who sits 5th in the team recruiting rankings. They have 14 commits, tight end Trey'Dez Green and quarterback Colin Hurley among the headliners. And we're going to do this from A+ through F. What grade are you giving Brian Kelly's 2024 class?
I'm giving the Tigers an A+. And Brian Kelly, let's go back to this time last year, when he had the fake accent, was trying to act all Southern. We saw in that initial 2023 class, that first cycle for them, they recruited nationwide. It felt like he was at Notre Dame. Fast forward to this 2024 class, he's already got 7 prospects from the state of Louisiana committed. LSU leads on the crystal ball for 3 more guys right in their backyard. So it seems like LSU has figured things out. You mentioned Trey'Dez Green, the big tight end. They got another one committed in Tavion Galloway. Brian Kelly, Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator there, they love to use the tight ends, get them involved. That's kind of the X factor for the Tigers on offense. And I think that's as good of a duo as you're going to find so far in the 2024 cycle. Deshaun McBride is another prospect they have committed, in-state safety prospect. He just ripped off a 4.53 on the lasers at a camp over the weekend. I think he's someone that could play multiple spots in the secondary. So really like the group LSU has assembled. I think this is exactly what the Tigers need to do, and we'll see how they finish it out. Also making a ton of headway with Kai Bates, a defensive back in Orlando. He's one of my favorite corner prospects out here. So far, A+ for LSU, and they're going to have a ton of official visitors this summer.
Moving on to South Carolina, Andrew, or should I say Professor Ivins. Shane Beamer is really up there recruiting. They are 3rd in the SEC, 9th overall nationally, 10 commitments, a lot of buzz, a lot of momentum. And this class has been a really strong point early on heading into the summer. What do you make of this 2024 class for them? What grade would you hand out to the Gamecocks?
I gave the Gamecocks an A, right? They are absolutely passing right now. And I think it starts with the offensive line. If you guys have followed the football recruiting show, you listen to my podcast with Cooper Patagna, we keep bringing up how the 2024 cycle lacks those blue chip offensive tackles. It seems like it's a down year. And South Carolina, they need help on offense in that offensive line room right now, and they need it long term. And the Gamecocks have 2 really good guys committed, Cam Pringle and Josiah Thompson. I like those guys a lot. And then they got 2 projects in Blake Franks and Mike Williams. So they are loading up at a key position where there really isn't a ton of elite talent out there. I like that. The tight end they got committed, Mike Smith out of Savannah, down in Georgia. He's one of the best pass catchers we have seen out there. We know that South Carolina got Nicholas Harbor on signing day last cycle. We think it's going to take some time for him to get ready. So Mike Smith, he's someone that has a chance to potentially step in and play right away. Then you peek to the June visitors list for South Carolina. It includes Dylan Stewart, the 5-star pass rusher. Again, Shane Beamer, he went into the DMV last cycle and shocked many, landing Nicholas Harbor. So we'll see what they can do. Really, really good group. And again, I think it starts up front with those corner protectors. South Carolina, that offensive line arrow is pointing up when we think about long term.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch the momentum Shane Beamer has in seemingly every aspect of his program right now. We'll go to Mississippi State now, where Zach Arnett still trying to get things going on the recruiting trail in his first season. The Bulldogs ranked 11th in the SEC, only 5 commits, but one of those is top 20 quarterback Josh Flowers. How do you grade this class?
Yeah, I gave Mississippi State a C+, and you mentioned Josh Flowers, the quarterback. He's an electric dual threat talent, a guy that can move the chains certainly with his legs. And Zach Arnett, I still think him and his staff are trying to find their footing. Go back to the 2023 cycle, really difficult situation with him taking over for the late Mike Leach, and they closed well on the recruiting trail, finished number 26 in the rankings. But right now they're all the way down in the 60s. You mentioned they got 5 guys committed, but only 1 prospect from their backyard. One of the top 25 ranked prospects in the state of Mississippi is committed to the Bulldogs. We've seen a ton of in-state prospects commit to other schools. TJ Lockhart's the guy I'm mentioning. He's number 19 in the state of Mississippi. So it'll be interesting to see how really the next few months go for them. And Mississippi State, I mean, we cannot knock them. They are all about the evaluations, getting kids on campus, getting them, putting them through drills at camp. So I think if you're a Mississippi State fan, that's what we're going to be keeping an eye on. Who they get on campus in June, who do they work out, and who ultimately ends up committed. But right now, definitely some work left to do for Mississippi State and first-year head coach Zach Arnett.
Mark Stoops has brought Kentucky to a bowl game every year since 2016. The recruiting success has reflected that on-field success, but not here in this 2024 recruiting cycle. Only 2 commitments. They're last in the SEC. And Andrew, I'm afraid maybe to ask you to pull out the Sharpie, but what grade are you handing out Kentucky?
I gave them a C, right? And I think it's hard to poke holes in Mark Stoops and his staff's philosophy, what they do. I mean, over the past few years, Kentucky's had 13 players selected in the NFL draft. That includes quarterback Will Levis. But, I've been wondering, when are they going to take the step forward? You mentioned all those bowl games. It wasn't too long ago that they had just won 10 games, but they're not getting the blue chippers. Now, when you look at the prospects expected to visit this upcoming summer, there are some big names there, and that's traditionally when Kentucky looks to make a move on the recruiting trail. So I think you got to be patient, but right now, certainly Kentucky, it's lacking on the recruiting front. I would think Mark Stoops, a guy that continuously puts out good squads, gets guys to the NFL. We would see a little bit more, not seeing it right now. And I do think it's a bit of a down year in state there in Kentucky. So that's playing a little bit into this. But we'll see what they do this summer. Some big-time prospects expected to visit. Kendall Jackson, a defensive lineman out of Florida. I like him a lot. They get him in the boat, then they can get this thing turned around.
All right, before we continue, everybody watching, you know what I'm going to ask. Go ahead and like this video. We're trying to get to 100 likes on the stream today, and throw your questions into the chat while you're there, too. We're answering those at the end of the show. Now, Andrew, let's take a look at the rest of your grades here. And, man, I wish you could have graded my papers in school, because this is a friendly report card right here. What do we have? We have 5 A's, only 3 C's, and it looks like the SEC West kind of has the better average here, maybe like a high B. But let's go through the rest of these 10 classes here, starting with the 2 most dominant schools on the recruiting trail. That's Georgia and Alabama. And you have to go back to the year 2000 to find the last time they both finished outside the top 10. You have Georgia at an A+, Bama at an A. What do you like about these classes?
Well, Georgia, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, anytime I talk with someone in Athens, they continue to bring up how this is such a pivotal class for them. They have to get dudes on campus. And UGA right now, it feels like they're just drafting on the defensive side of the ball. They continue to get talent there. So I think it's notable when we look at who they're chasing after, who they have committed on the offensive side of the ball. I really like some of those individuals. Nitron Tuggle, a wide receiver. I think he's electric with the ball in his hands. And then you heard Steve Wiltfong mention it on the whip around. I mean, they lead for Dylan Raiola on the 24/7 Sports Crystal Ball. They're also going to get 5-star wide receiver Ryan Wingo on campus, 5-star wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, Carter Nelson, Jaden Randall, 2 tight ends. So Georgia, it's a fine-tuned machine right now, not surprising. Now with Alabama, you brought it up, that class average. I mean, they only have a few guys committed right now. And I always caution people this time of the year when we talk about the Crimson Tide, they really haven't took that recruiting machine out of the driveway yet and put it into drive. Traditionally, July and August is when they start picking up all their commitments. And I think that will be the case once again. I do like the group they have committed right now. Julian Sayin, one of the top quarterbacks in the 2024 cycle. We know the quarterback position is somewhere where Alabama's trying to find answers, and Sayin's one of the best guys there. That's why I gave Alabama an A right now.
Moving on to Tennessee and Florida, both are looking to build off top 15 classes in the 2023 recruiting cycle. You have Tennessee with a B+, you have Florida with an A so far. How are you feeling about both programs?
Let's start with the Gators, right? I mean, coming off a difficult year one for Billy Napier, I don't think enough has been said on a national level about them getting 5-star safety Xavier Filsam out of the state of Texas. That is about as impressive of a get we have seen so far in the 2024 recruiting cycle. Yes, they're going to need to hang on to him, but they also got some good linebackers committed. And then the quarterback, DJ Lagway. Florida, it looked like the future of that quarterback room was going to be as good as it's ever been. And then there's some defections, some things that they can't really control. The NIL situation with Jaden Rashada. DJ Lagway, probably the closest thing we have seen to Anthony Richardson in this cycle. He's an elite athlete with a big arm. Just needs to get more consistent. So I like what Florida's doing right now. Recruiting their backyard well. Still a ton of big names in play for them. Another program that's going to get a ton of visitors on campus. Tennessee, their MO has really been the past few years is, I think, finding potential impact players on the defensive side of the ball, and they continue to do that. Caleb Beasley, he's a guy that had 9 interceptions as a junior. I haven't found a defensive back with that many takeaways in terms of the blue chippers in the 2024 cycle. So I like what they're doing there. And then quarterback Jake Merklinger, we saw him on the intro to this segment. I think he's the perfect guy for the Volunteers to take after Nico Iamaleava. Merklinger has started more games than anyone else in the 2024 cycle. He doesn't get rattled. He can run the football. And I think he's someone that if something were to happen to Nico, he can step in and carry that offense. So like what Tennessee is doing as well. And they are certainly also chasing after some big fish with a bunch of guys expected to make their way to Knoxville in the coming months.
All right, we'll go to Texas A&M and Arkansas now. We all know the pressure Jimbo Fisher is facing on the field this season. The Aggies currently rank 25th nationally with 6 commits. As for the Hogs, they're in the top 20, which would give them back-to-back top 25 classes. You rated A&M a B+, the Hogs a B. Why did you go there?
I really like what Texas A&M is doing on defense. We'll see what they're going to do on offense, but they pick up a commitment earlier this week from Jordan Pride, a top 247 safety. I think he's got the tools and someone that can play a variety of different positions on the back end. They also got a linebacker that recently committed out of the state of Mississippi, Tristan Jernigan. He's got some traits not talked about enough. And then Dalen Evans, a longtime defensive line commit. Remember 2 years ago what the Aggies were able to do with that defensive front. This is a guy that would rank right there with all those other 5 stars that they took. And Dalen Evans has other schools coming after him. Florida's after him. I think Texas A&M needs to hold on to Dalen Evans. He is a key piece to the class. Reminds me of Gervin Dexter, who was at Florida, just selected in the 2nd round of the NFL draft. When you talk about Arkansas, they already got a few of the state's top-ranked prospects committed. Sam Pittman, we know that he can recruit. They missed out on Aaron Nolan, the quarterback, but they get KJ Jackson, a kid from the state of Alabama. He's also left-handed. That's notable because the new offensive coordinator, Dan Enos, he's worked with some lefties in the past. Have you ever heard of Tua Tagovailoa? Dan Enos coached him up when he was at Alabama. So I like what Arkansas is doing. They're always going to be, as long as Sam Pittman's there, focused on finding big individuals and dominating the trenches. So far in this 2024 class, I think they're doing just that with the group they got committed.
You're giving both Auburn and Ole Miss Bs as we hit mid-May. Obviously, Hugh Freeze new there, and he's been hitting the transfer portal. His old school Ole Miss has 6 commitments so far in the cycle. What makes you give them both Bs right now?
Yeah, probably a little generous with this B for Auburn. And, Hugh Freeze, I don't want to take any knock on him. I think it's been really impressive what he has done since he has arrived on the Plains. Late in that 2023 cycle, they flipped a ton of kids, got them committed, and then they've made a big splash here in the transfer portal in that second window, getting Peyton Thorne, the quarterback from Michigan State. 2024 recruiting, we haven't really seen it yet. Walker White, we saw him on the intro. He picked Auburn, but just a handful of guys committed. I think they're going to hit their stride here as we get to the summer months and then into the season. They're involved with Cam Coleman, a big-time wide receiver prospect. I mean, if he went to Auburn, that's a guy that could potentially play day one. So like what Auburn is doing there. And remember, they just opened a new football facility. I'm a big believer that, the Auburn fans are always going to support that program. So they just need to win some games and the fan base will be there. And I think that's going to help Hugh Freeze here as this cycle progresses. Ole Miss, is transferred to the SIP, when you look at their class, I like Jeffrey Rush, the interior defensive lineman they have committed. But, I still think the folks in Oxford are kind of juggling, hey, how much do we want to be involved in the transfer portal? How much do we want to be involved in the high school recruiting process? Last cycle, they landed 5-star Suntarine Perkins and top 247 wide receiver Aiden Williams. Those were really big gets for them. But, not a ton of guys in the boat so far. I will say DeMond Williams, the quarterback they have committed out of Arizona, I think he could be exciting in Lane Kiffin's offense. He's a dual threat talent. Now, I don't know when he's going to get on the field. It seems like Ole Miss is always taking transfer quarterbacks, but he's kind of electric and someone that I think can move the chains with both his arm and legs. So we'll see what Ole Miss does here. And they, too, will probably have a bunch of visitors on campus here in the month of June.
All right, before we get to our last two teams, keep the likes coming, people. You're already here, so why not click the thumbs up button? We're trying to get to 100 likes by the end of this show. Our last two teams, Andrew, Vanderbilt and Missouri. You have a B for Vandy, 12th in the SEC with 5 commits. It does feel like they're a program on the come-up, though. And a C for Mizzou as it sits 13th in the SEC with 3 pledges. How do you feel about these two classes?
Well, Vandy, Josh Pate said it on his show, right? He's taking the over in terms of their win total for 2023. I look at Vandy's class, and I know our former colleague Barton Simmons is there, but man, they every take they have, I think, makes a ton of sense. And the reason Vandy's got a B is because they needed to find a quarterback. They didn't take one last cycle, and they got 2 guys committed. Whit Muschamp, who's the son of UGA defensive coordinator Will Muschamp, and then this kid, Jeremy St. Hilaire. Both those guys are in-state prospects. You put on the tape, and there's a lot to like about them. So Vandy addressing a position of need, and they also lead on the crystal ball for Cameron Keys, who's a cornerback out of the state of Florida that might move into the top 247 for us. So I think Vandy, they're doing just what they need to do. Now, on the flip side, Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz, another program that's kind of lived in the transfer portal. Let's not forget, it wasn't too long ago that they signed 5-star wide receiver Luther Burden. That's what Missouri was able to do, but it seems like the recruiting has dropped off here a little bit. It's been a bit difficult for them to kind of connect with some of the local prospects. They do have a quarterback committed, but you would think you would have seen a little bit more for the Tigers, but at the same time, they continue to invest just so much time in that transfer portal, and they've had success. Last season, Missouri had one of the top defenses in the SEC, and a good chunk of those guys came via the transfer portal. So we'll see how much more they look to the high school ranks, but it's a program that's really saving some of those counters and spaces for veterans and mercenaries that can come in and play right away.
All right, so the SEC looking pretty good overall, thanks to Professor Ivins. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. And for more from him.
I don't want a bunch of calls from parents, right? I'm not trying to sit in any parent-teacher meeting.
You might get them. I don't know. You talk these recruits up pretty well, though.